Mitchell event. It's a great day, and it's great because we have a great Air Force speaker that's going to be with us today. I also like to say hello, General Lowe. Thanks for coming and joining us and spending some time with us, sir. We're going to take a look today at the Air Force long-range planning and the year ahead. And we've all seen as the budgets come out, and what does that mean for our Air Force. And we hope to carry over the conversation from today down in Orlando next week. And hopefully I'll get to see a lot of you down there. We do thank all of you for your support of Mitchell and AFA at large. Before we get started, I'd like to bring your attention to a couple upcoming events. The first is the rollout of our study on hypersonic weapons. It'll be on March 1st, and there'll be some information on how we're going to do that. It'll be over on Capitol Hill. And the second is the commemoration of the 25th anniversary of Desert Storm on March 9th. I think seats are getting really slender for that, but if you still have an interest in being a part of that, go ahead and give us a holler, and we can try to get you in. When you leave today, the gate of the parking garage will be open, so you don't need a coin, so just let yourself out. So today, we're very honored to host Lieutenant General Mike Hour Holmes. He's the Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategic Plans and Requirements for Headquarters, United States Air Force. In addition to being a command pilot with more than 4,000 hours, General Holmes has served in multiple tours in key strategic offices on the Air Staff and the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Since arriving in the Pentagon in 2014, General Holmes has led the Air Force's effort to better align its long-range plans with its annual budget cycle. This will ensure the Air Force is able to make better annual choices that align strategy with budget instead of the other way around. General Holmes will outline his new approach to building the Air Force of the future. Please help me welcome Hour Holmes.
Good morning, everyone. Besides this crowd, it must be a pretty slow week in Washington. Not a lot going on, but I'm honored that you're here. I'm happy to have a chance to talk to you about what's going on in the Air Force. So to set the stage for you, about a year ago, I was over and I talked about how our chief Mark Welsh had reorganized us to try to help us get at strategic planning in the Air Force and put planning in front of programming across the Air Force. And if you're going to do that, you think about your processes, you think about the organizational structure, you think about the people, and make some changes and all those things. And just as a quick review, the chief we had a 3-5 in the past, so we had a 3 with a 5 combined, and we had an 8 that was by itself that did programming. We're going to get this tuned up. I think you can hear me. I hope I can see eye contact. I think you can hear me, and what they're recording is the reason we're putting up with this, but we'll get it figured out. So we took part of the 5 away from the 3, and we moved the 5 over and aligned it with the 8 to create a 5-8. We have 3 directorates there. We have a strategy directorate led by Major General Jeff Newell. We have a plans directorate led by Major General Tim Fay, who's here along with his deputy, Mr. Sean Barnes. And then we brought requirements over intact from the 3, and that's led by Major General Paul Johnson. We took our programming function, the engine room basically, the integration cell that worked programming, and the chief wanted us to concentrate less on that and more on planning. And so we moved the engine room over into the FM. And to make this work in the short term, FM had to create room within their headspace for the 30 or so people we sent over. So they had to find 30 billets to pull people out of that were doing budget work and make available. And we moved our 30 people from the engine room straight over there, led by Brigadier General Ed Fienga. And they took over the same duties they had been doing, but under the FM. We kept the panels in the A58. So how we're organized now is we have a planning integration shop that is still in the A8X in the plan side. It does the integration work on our planning that I'll talk to you about. The programming integration shop is in FM, and then the panels feed and support both, which has some benefits and has some problems that go with it. But at the end of our kind of first year doing it that way, we had a hot wash with the chief and ultimately decided to leave things kind of the way they are for another year and continue to refine the way we're doing business. So I'll start by walking you through what we're doing with long-range planning and how that's evolved. And
And then I want to talk to you a little bit about the capability development planning effort that we're undertaking to get at some of the bigger problems that we found hard to solve over the last 10 to 15 years. So slide, please. We start
Like you should, with high-level guidance. So we have, national security strategy, we have a national military strategy, we have defense
programming and planning guidance that we receive every year. We have an Air Force long-term plan that I'll talk about that we built, and then we have our normal interaction with the Secretary and the Chief and the Secretary's priorities of taking care of people, balancing modernization and readiness, and making every dollar count. And all these
high-level guidance.
ports directly into the strategic guidance that we built. Slide, please. So as we look at the problems
That our Air Force faced, we decided that the top of our list of our problems was becoming an Air Force, or the fact that, I guess,
start with the problem,
is that it took us a long time
to solve any problems. It took us a long time to make a change in the Air Force.
We had lost some of the agility that airmen were famous for and were expected to do, and we were building, 30-year development programs, and we weren't able to have much influence on those. And if you aren't careful with the 30-year development program, you set a requirement that's so high that the technology is not quite there to do it. And then by
By the time you work through that for 30 years, you deliver technology that's behind what you would like to have to fit a context that's changed in the world, and you have a tremendous investment in it. So we want to become a more strategically agile Air Force, and what that means to us is to be
be an Air Force that can react to the world faster than we've been able to. When you're living in a world governed by Moore's Law,
where computing power changes, doubles every 18 months, depending on how you want to look at that. In a world where the political context is changing rapidly, we needed to be an Air Force that could keep up with that change and not be lagging behind it. So that's the first thing that we're trying to do, is become a more strategically agile Air Force. And then as you take that over into our operational realm, slide please. We've also published kind of an aspirational Air Force future operating concept that talks about how this Air Force that we're going to become would operate as airmen in partnership with the Joint Force. And the idea there is to become more operationally agile, to be able to provide Joint Force commanders a range of options taken from multi-domain solutions, not just air solutions, but aerospace and cyber solutions to their problems, and be able to shift our weight of effort rapidly between those and become more operationally agile as well. So if you look at the things that we did over time, A5S, our strategy shop, was primarily charged with this, and over about 2 years, we published a set of documents like you'd see in any kind of relook at refocusing an organization. So we started with the mission of the Air Force, restating global vigilance, global reach, and global power for America. We put a vision document out there that kind of talks about what airmen do and what we aspire to be. We wrote a overarching strategic framework that talked about becoming more agile. And then the 2 documents on the bottom, the one on the left is that future operating concept that I talked about. And then the one on the right is the strategic master plan that takes that high-level guidance and turns it into goals and objectives. There's a plan with 4 annexes underneath the plan. There's a human capital annex, a posture annex that says where will those airmen that we're going to develop in human capital annex, where will they be based and what will those bases be like. The capabilities annex, which is what we traditionally focused our efforts on, what stuff are we going to buy to operate. And then a science and technology annex that says how are we going to invest our money in the future beyond R&D, but out into the science and technology future world. And I wouldn't be telling you the complete truth if I told you that all 4 of those were fleshed out at the same level. That the capabilities part that we typically focused on is further along and more developed than the rest. The human capital annex is probably next. There's a lot going on there in our Air Force and in the joint world to try to improve the way we recruit, develop, and retain talent. And we're playing our role there. And then the posture annex and the S&T annex are less developed. We'll get on a cycle where we will redo those about every other year. And so we're starting on our first redo of the strategic master plan and the annexes. Now that people have had a chance to see them for a couple of years, to have that be reflected down into their core function plans for a year or so, to have some ideas about what they wish was different in it or what we need to change as the world changes. And this year we'll do a rewrite of those documents. Slide, please. So, has anything changed in the way we do business as a result of those documents? So my predecessor, Lieutenant General Mike Moeller, who recently published a report with the Mitchell Society on the bomber requirements for the future, and we appreciate the effort that the Mitchell Society puts in to help us think about our future problems and how we might solve them. Worked out this kind of flow chart on how we do our business to turn strategic guidance into a program. And I'm going to focus on the part that's in the yellow box there today, and this is the area that we've worked on over the last couple of years to try to take our high-level guidance and turn it into real decisions during the planning process in a 20-year kind of thought-out plan instead of focusing on a yearly balance of the budget and what can we afford within that yearly balance of the budget. So the first year we did it, we ended up with kind of scheduling pucks on a board model that figured everybody could understand from their aviation background that showed, okay, here's what's left to fit in and kind of pucks of $200 million, and here's what would have to come out to make room for it. And the idea was to move those pucks around the board with senior leaders and come to some solution that we hand off to the programmers. The problem with that is that almost all of us would like to pick things we think should be added into it, and nobody much enjoys picking the stuff that would come out. So our first kind of approach at that ended up with a bunch of stuff that we had senior leader agreement should be in the plan, and not much agreement on what should come out. And so we turned to a classic programmer's approach of assigning bogeys across the MASH comms, rank ordering those from 1 to N, and coming up with a kind of a salami slice solution to it instead of a prioritized solution. Last year's effort, after having a second year to work through it, we ended up doing a lot more integration work up front. So the MASH comms came together, and now they had some stake in the game. They believed that this process might actually be something that the chief used to make decisions, and so they better play in it, or they might not have a voice in it. So they came in and played hard at the 06 level in the first integration meeting, and then with their 5/8s to kind of develop the choices there. And then we spent a lot of time with MASHCOM vice commanders trying to take any MASHCOM red lines off the table, to take must-pay bills, make sure those were done, that we didn't spend our time with our senior leaders, talking about things that we knew were going to go in there anyway. If you're looking at operational MASHCOMs, the kind of things they offer up every year tend to be foundational things that they hope somebody else will pay for. They tend to offer up education and training resources and those things that are foundational to the Air Force that you have to pay. And what happens is we make a bunch of pre-decisions, and then at the end, the senior leaders stick the must-pay bills back in. We tried to avoid that. Go ahead and get the must-pay bills in there from the beginning, see how much trade space we really had. And then the goal was to produce a 30-year plan with a lot of focus on the first 20 years of it, so 4 FIDEPs worth, and then a detailed, integrated, build in a 10-year budget level solution to the first 10 years, with the goal of, if we can figure that out, we'll know what we can afford and what we can't afford. We'll be able to make decisions on the priorities within that. And then as we get better at it, we'll be able to cut the first 5 years of that off and turn it over to the programmers, and they won't have to go through the whole, bring all the MASHCOMs back in and start from scratch because the plan doesn't fit in to the program. So through that effort last year, we got to the end. We ended up with about 7 issues that had come up late that we needed senior leader prioritization. The chief and the secretary prioritized those issues for us. We went back in with our team and were able to fit those in by making trades with things that we agreed were less priority. And we delivered a solution to the programmers this year that we have roughly a $600 billion budget over 5 years, about 5 times 120 billion. And when they took the planning costing and they took that and translated that into the program software and recosted it out, it was within about $1 billion out of 600 billion, which is a tremendous step, because what it means is they don't have to go back and start over in the programming process. They can take the work that we did and refine it instead of going back and starting over because we gave them an unbalanced solution. Can't give enough credit to General Fay and Mr. Barnes, Colonel Alex Drinkowitz that ran the planning integration cell and their team on the work that went into doing that, and the coordination that happened between the plans integration cell and the program integration cell, our traditional engine room, again, led by General Ed Fienga and Colonel Rick Moore. A lot of work trying to figure out where the pitfalls were in that and solving them before we got to it. So we delivered that set out there, and, you know, for those of you that worked in this business know, it's kind of time travel. You're working through budgets at a time. So we're working 17 to 21, that's the budget that's on the Hill that we previewed. We worked the 18-21 plan, and now the programmers are turning that into our 18 to 22 program that we have to deliver to OSD by the end of June, and we'll go through the PBR process this fall. And we started building our 19 plan to go back through the iteration of the 19 to 23 plan. And of course, the challenge is trying to keep all those where they match to some extent, to react to the changes that OSD makes, and to react to the changes that come out in the year earlier budget that Congress makes in an NDAA, and then fix that on the current one that you're working. So the snake chart lays out the order that we do it. I'm gonna go now and talk about what's in that yellow box, or our planning choices process, or what we're gonna do different this year than we've done in previous years. And every year's been a learning experience for us. Every year we learn a little bit more about what we wanna get after and how to get after it. Slide, please. So this is our timeline. I think it's, there's a little bit of it cut off, but the difference that we're trying to make this year is we're doing two things differently. One, we're changing our terminology into more of a joint planning language that people are familiar with. So we began with the mission analysis. We'll have in-progress reviews, like you do if you're reviewing a plan. And we'll change a little bit of the nomenclature there. But the second thing is that in previous years, we haven't had the luxury of time or people or space or knowledge to be able to build competing solutions. We've built one optimized solution. It was the best we could do. We laid that in front of the chief and the secretary after 11 months of work. It was too late really for them to send it back and say, you know, this is okay, but I really wish you had gone way left of this or way right of this. And now I'm down to where I can only change a few things at the end game. So this year we'll build some varied courses of action that try to get after our problems in different ways. So we'll work through the process the same way we did last year, with integration at the kernel level, with a lot of work at the 5A level, and we'll determine some multiple courses of action on how the Air Force might choose to go forward, kind of in a portfolio of issues, instead of, again, salami slicing across all 12 of our core functions, trying to play fair with everybody. We're gonna allow them to set some different priorities, work through and see what those would look like. Have our analysts in A9 and run those against the scenarios that the Department of Defense requires us to plan against. Kind of see which ones of those COAs might offer some better solutions against a range of challenges that we face. So we're up there in between that 19 February event and the 21 April event. We've done the mission analysis, and we're coordinating that with the MASHCOMs to come to a solution there. When that's done, we'll take it to the vice and the under to work through and get their agreement that that's the way they want us to move forward. Then we'll start to develop COAs. This summer, we'll bring those COAs together. We'll make some choices on how many of those we want to carry forward and how we're going to approach it. And in previous years, we've had 12 separate core function feature plans. And this year, we're going to build an integrated 10-year plan that's an Air Force plan instead of 12 core function plans cobbled together, you know, with staples in a binder. We're going to make some choices and put those together and use those COAs to help us integrate those at that level. We'll work through integration group to make sure that we have the funding right and that we're building a plan that we can actually hand off to the programmers and they'll execute. We'll take advantage of the lessons learned on why were we $1 million out of balance this year when we delivered it. What can we do to minimize that? And then we'll lead up to another fall planning choices event where we nail down the major muscle movements in a plan, and then we turn it over to the programmers to turn it into programming language and take it into the OSD process. I still serve as the service's 3-star programmer. The OSD process is set up to have a uniform 3-star military guy that follows through the program and budget review process. TFPs from mission areas up through 3-star programmer level. And then they go to what the current administration calls the DMAG, or Defense Management Action Group. It's chaired by Secretary of Work, and work through to make recommendations to the SecGov. So that's where we are on this year's planning and what we expect to do a little bit different. Again, we're really proud of the work that our guys did last year. We think it's a real step forward for us in being able to think about the future. And then we're trying to figure out how we'll make it a little bit better this year as we work through it. Slide, please. as we worked through that process, part of what we found is that one of the maybe unintended consequences of our core function mission focus by giving a 4-star lead for each of our core functions is that, like I said, we ended up with 12 separate plans that weren't always integrated together. And then if you're trying to prioritize within those 12 individual core functions, you end up leaving out the things that are cross-cutting across them because you hope somebody else will pay that bill and you put your money into the things that are your priorities. And so we came up with a process that we experimented with last year called Enterprise Capability Collaboration Teams. And my former bosses in the room from, my younger days will remember that Air Force Systems Command used to take the whole process from identify a capability gap all the way through to acquiring a system and then turn it over to people to field and manage. When we combined Systems Command with our support of those systems and ended up with Air Force Materiel Command, we did that because we thought we had a gap in the Air Force between the folks that acquired systems and the people that sustained them. And we wanted to make sure that we were acquiring systems that had the benefit of the sustainers in the acquisition process so that we could close that gap. We did that, but like usually happens when you reorganize, and we opened up a gap on how do you look at these things that go across the Air Force and focus on an issue that doesn't neatly fit maybe into one core function. We decided to go with a couple of projects this year, and we did 2 enterprise level capability collaboration teams. The first one was Air Superiority 2030, and it was designed to take a hard look at our future air superiority requirement, to look at multi-domain solutions to achieve it, and to try to take a step back and not jump straight into an AOA for a $250 million fighter that we spend 30 years developing and may or may not be able to afford in numbers. But to look at the threat, to take advantage of all the research that's been done both within the Air Force, within the Department of Defense, in the industry, at DARPA, all the different people that are doing work thinking about that future with our sister services, primarily the Navy, where we have a partnership in next generation air dominance. And try to take a step back and think about what our solution should be for that problem. Alex Grinkowicz again led this team. Alex was a graduated 53rd Wing Commander from Eglin, so he came out of a weapons school background and a test background there, and he's pretty familiar with what was going on in the future and what was there in the test world. He took a really, I think, a model analytical approach to the problem, and they'll be briefing out their results here in the next month or so as we finish that team up. They're going to provide us, I think, some great ideas and guidance for the future, but more than that, they've set a really good template for how we're going to conduct these teams in the future and how to make a study plan and then go out and execute that study plan with the help of our experts at Air Force Materiel Command that still have that capability planning expertise with folks from the labs, again, industry, academia, our other services, and the folks that they talk to. We did a second one to take a look at the ground-based strategic deterrent for our replacement for the ICBM. Ultimately, over the course of the year, I think we've decided that that was probably not as appropriate for an enterprise solution. There's not as big a multi-domain piece of that. That one will end up getting handed back, I think, to Global Strike Command, to the program office to continue that development. And we'll be looking at what will we create in the next round. Kind of the candidates that we're looking at for the next round are cross-cutting things, again, that go across multiple functions. Electronic warfare, electronic combat would probably be somewhere at the top of that list. That's an area that we have lost some strategic centralized focus on over the last 10 years. Our overall munitions strategy and portfolio is another one that we need to take a look at. Command and control has been discussed. How are we going to move toward the multi-domain command and control that we talk about in our future Air Force operating concept and actually turn it into a reality? How will we make the decisions and how will we develop that? And then another potential one is the base of the future. How will we operate airfields in contested environments, and what tool set will we give wing commanders to fight their air base as a weapon system in the face of the threats that our potential adversaries are laying into? So this is the wheel we'll spin around as we go through it. I doubt it's changed much really over the time that we've existed, but the way we'll approach it is, again, starting with guidance, strategic environment assessment we published, which takes a look at the how we think the future will be. We'll do this one with multiple futures, because again, it's too hard to go down to just one. If you pick one, you can pretty much be 100% sure it's wrong, and we'll try to pick some multiple futures and then judge our capabilities against more than one. We'll update our strategy and master plan. We'll put planning guidance out, and planning guidance is out for 19. That drives the studies and the things that need to be done to shape 19. Our core function leads will work through that. Planning choices through that process will build one integrated plan that will result in a resource allocation plan. That guidance gets translated into the programmers from the planners, and then we go into the OSD process for the program and budget review. Becomes the president's budget, and then we start on the next year. So on the capability development side, this is kind of what I was talking about here. On the problem is that we moved to having one Air Force strategy, but we still have multiple Air Force plans that move out to try to solve that. And our idea is to try to bring those together and set some priorities and to be able to solve problems that go across one core function. We found that, if you ask our core function leads to balance within their portfolio, you get some pretty poor trades. If you have one portfolio may be the most important or more important as you move forward into the future because of adversaries or because of opportunities or because of changes in the world. If you make people balance within the portfolio, you'll never get to the kind of thing that you need to get to. And then it was hard to integrate with no trade space through that. So what we're looking for is to be able to have some Air Force level prioritization and guidance, knowing that most of the intellectual capital is still out there in the MASCOMs. That's where the work, the people still are to get the work done. So how do we bring that together and make sure we get the benefit of their insights and their experience? To look at the processes, to look at the governance, to make sure that we're looking not at just material solutions, but that we're looking across the .mil-PF at the range of non-material solutions as well to our problems in this budget constrained environment. And then to tie that to analysis, so that analysis can lead to insights that can affect decisions and scenarios. So this slide's pretty decisional. The next two are, this is another kind of restatement of the problem. This is AFMC's look at it. So as we move toward development planning, that's a definition that came to us out of a study done by the Air Force Studies Board. And our goals are to say, so what are the gaps we need to fill in the next 20-year plan and prioritize them? What's the best way to go about filling them? And then what opportunities are there out there to do things in new ways? Is there a new technology that will be ready to go? Brennan talked about the report that the Mitchell Society is doing on hypersonic weapons. That may be one of the new technologies. We think autonomy and man-machine teaming is one of the places that we need to go look at to move beyond manned systems and unmanned systems, but how do manned and unmanned systems cooperate in real time on the battlefield. So we'll look at opportunities, we'll look at gaps, and then we also have to be willing to, my wife is a writer. She writes novels for kids, and as you go through that editing process, you have to do what they call being willing to kill your children. You write a really part of this book that you're really in love with, but you get to the end of it and it doesn't belong in the story anymore. And you love that piece of writing, but it has to go because the story wins and it's not part of the story now. We're going to have to be willing to kill some of our children, and if we're going to prioritize new opportunities and new gaps, we're going to have to be able to let go of some old things too. And so the process needs to help us set priorities there and identify the things that we can afford to do with that. So slide please. So what we'll get to is that we'll have the guidance that I talked about early from the Secretary-in-Chief. Bill, please. 858 will lead an assessment in cooperation with basically you, with the Department of Defense, with academia, with industry on what their ideas are, with the FFRDCs and the other think tanks in town, and try to look at the things we see on the right. Both the capability gaps identified by Intel and by our requirements guys, with the challenges that we're going to face in the future, and with the opportunities that are out there on the tech side. Slide, please. We'll prioritize those, and we'll come up through our planning choices and planning process with nominating these enterprise capability collaboration teams to get at our big problems. We'll decide what bandwidth we have, how many we can handle at any one time. We'll decide who should be on those teams and who will lead them. We found out with that air superiority 2013, the most important thing we did was pick the leader. We picked exactly the right person to go bring that to a conclusion and execute that study. We know that's important. And then what resources will they get? Last year, in the 17 budget, in the previous budget, we set aside some money for experimentation, mostly for modeling and simulation. To try to bring our Air Force own modeling and simulation capability up to a standard that some of you have in industry, so that we could own the models and own the tools and go in and get after experimenting and looking at our own problems and not pay, it's a cliche, but not pay 20 different contractors to build us 20 different models of an SA-20. To have one data set that we own that can work across a multi-domain problem set, and that we can send people in there when we want without having to worry about whether we can get access to somebody else's time. That was about 13 million or so a year. Starting in 17, we upped that to 100 million a year, so that we'll have money to go experiment with the things that come out of these teams. So if they identify 2 or 3 areas that they think with a little push, we can turn from a low readiness level technology or manufacturing up into a higher level and move forward with it. And we'll put that money every year, and we'll also make those decisions within this group. Where are the priorities? Where are the most promising places? And where do we want to recommend to the Chief and the Secretary that we spend that experimentation money? Slide, please. AFMC then has the people and the expertise, and they'll take over and support the teams as they do their work. They have the SIMAF facility, they have the engineers, they have the experts to help them through that process. They'll use analysis, experimentation, and wargaming tools to drive some recommendations. Slide, please. That team lead then will go out and do his work or her work over the year along with the team that they put together and report out with analysis and insights and some recommendations. Slide, please. And then we'll work those through the group that started at the top, led by the A5A, and we'll make recommendations in planning choices time with some recommended decisions on where to put more money, where to take it from, what actions need to be done, investments, and what to go back and look for with further study. Slide, please. With the goal of producing the warfighter capability that airmen in the future will need and that the Joint Force of the future needs to be successful. So what I hope I've left you with is that there's room for all of you to play in that process. We'll be looking for help again in academia, from the ideas that industry is putting together, from new developments in science and technology field, and from new ideas on how we can approach the problems in non-material solutions. We'll be looking to our international partners as well, and to the folks that we expect to operate with as future warfighters, and we look forward to collaborating with you over this process. Slide. So you can kill the slides if you would, and that's what I had for you formally today, and I'll be happy to take the questions. Yes, sir.
You can ask without the mic. You can ask without the mic.
I'll repeat it. Go ahead and ask, and I'll repeat it.
I'm James Drew from White Local. So, 2 little things vehicles haven't addressed too much. It's changed in this FY16 budget. Firstly, you're going to buy Huey helicopter replacements for Huey helicopter. You're also going to improve radar and too. Could you explain why you're making those investments? And also, I've heard perhaps the Huey might be sole source for a company. Have you any detail on that?
Yeah, so I'll answer that. I'll answer that quickly. These are kind of acquisition questions. So we are going to move out. We're going to fund a replacement helicopter for the UH-1N that serves multiple missions for the Air Force. About half of the UH-1 fleet serves the missile fields where our ICBMs are, and provide a variety of support there on the missile field. The rest of them do a variety of roles, from kind of range management and control through moving people around in a squadron in Yokota to our continuity of government mission and moving folks there. So we've been flying the UH-1, an airplane older than I am. The modifications we've done in it to the UH-1N. It's still a viable airplane, but it has speed and payload issues that we need too many of them to do the mission, so we need to move to a future helicopter. We're looking at a range of acquisition strategies. One of the things we're considering is splitting the missile field requirement off from the rest of the requirement. And then if if we do that, we'll determine about whether we want to go sole source or competition within that. It's too early for me to say exactly where we're gonna go with that. We are gonna move out to replace the UH-1N. That money is in the budget for the FIDA that we're laying out. And the decisions on exactly how to proceed will be made in consultation with the department and with the Congress on how we're gonna go forward. Second question was
B-52
on B-52 radar. We're gonna keep the B-52 around. It provides some missions for us that are hard to replicate. Primarily the range and payload that the airplane provides. The radar currently flying on the B-52 is limited by its mean time between failure. It's an old radar. It doesn't have the reliability we'd like to have, and if you're flying long duration missions and you get to a 2-digit mean time between failure, it means you're flying around with a broken radar a lot. And so we will buy a new radar. We're working through exactly what the requirements will be for that radar. If I was gonna guess, I'd say we'll probably take an existing radar somewhere and make it fit on the B-52 instead of developing something. Jerlo.
So, okay, can I ask 2 questions?
Jerlo, you can have 3 if you want.
The first one is pretty easy, the second one is easy too.
Yes, sir.
And I really appreciate this is good stuff, and it's a lot better than it was in the past. On the very last chart, where you got capability, output, and
Yes, sir.
capability development, that's the requirement of this investment.
Right.
4 lifetimes in the plan. I expected to see at the bottom of that chart, the document, the operational.
Right,
whatever you
CDD,
call it,
right.
a SON or a lock, now it's a
Right.
CDD.
Right.
So, because the output of development planning, which, the Air Force Studies Board, I hope.
Yes, sir. You bet.
But anyway, because the correct output, the product of good development planning is a bulletproof performance document, a piece of paper, or 5 paper. Here's what we want to fly now. And it's bulletproof because we cover all the cost what ifs, the economic what ifs, the operational what ifs, the threat what ifs, all that's done. All this stuff, I never see a document come out.
I'll answer that one by saying I think you're right.
That you can get the industry that says, here's what we want to buy, and it's been through the whole process, and that's the product is the requirement.
Yes, sir.
So I just.
I'll take that one, you bet.
I expected on that last pull there, where it said work like a big
Right.
study, to say CDD, here's the requirement, we can pass out.
Yes, sir.
Second question, my second point is that LRSB, great program, but you're gonna have to fight for LRSB every day, every week, every month.
Absolutely.
Okay? Because there's people out there that are not trying to kill it. They're all over this town.
Yes, sir.
But we need, I think, it's what we have always had on the F-22, and as a national team to support LRSB. All the industry guys behind it, they're part of the program. But in LRSB, the security guys have captured the program. We don't even know who the engine manufacturer is, much less all the other stuff. The sooner that the Air Force can release the team, the industry team on LRSB, the more support you're gonna get. If you don't do that, you're not gonna survive.
Yes, sir.
So.
I'll take that.
No, I've talked to Bill Walsh about this.
Yes, sir.
I said, and he said, well, as soon as the protest is adjudicated, we're gonna do that. Well, that was yesterday, I haven't seen it yet. No, I'm serious. I don't even know who's building the engine.
Yes, sir. I think we'll make some announcements soon, most likely in the first week of March.
But if you want congressional support, if you want industry support, you gotta get that team out there.
Yes,
And
sir.
you can't let the RCO run the security program. The best one was F-22, where we went from B2, where we all got hammered because it was too classified. And I said, the next time we do this, which we keep looking into, we're gonna do it right with all the sensitive technology, the level 4, nobody knows about that. Everything else, milestones, cost, issues, let it be free. You get much more support, and we have a national team on the F-22, and it worked until about 8 ago. But nonetheless, so anyway, I just encourage you to give that message to the next staff meeting.
Yes, sir.
We really need to know what the team is on LRS.
Yes, sir. Good advice. Thanks.
here in the back.
Hi, sir. Courtney Alvin with Inside the Air Force. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how we see the third offset strategy reflected in both the FY17 budget and also through the FIDIP. I know the Defense Department has allocated about $3.6 billion in FY17 for third offset, and how much Air Force, how much of the Air Force budget is that, and then also what was the process for considering third offset, as you went through this planning process?
So I'll say a couple things to that. I'd say the department identified money that's within the budget that's kind of spent that aligns with the ideas in the third offset strategy, and that's where that 3.8 billion comes from. So there's a lot of content in the program from the Air Force and from the other services that was already aligned with where the Secretary Carter and Secretary Work are taking the third offset. I think if you read our Air Force future operating concept and you look at the speeches that Secretary Work or Secretary Carter made, you'll see that there's a lot that lines up there in thinking about how are we going to take the power of big data and of the growing capability of autonomous systems and pair those together with people so that they make people better and they help people support decisions that people make and that they support people in warfighting roles by teaming those things together. We're participating in that process. We think it's well aligned with what airmen do and the ideas that we already have as we're moving forward. It'll be a multi-year process, and the defense program, is a giant ship that turns, but it turns at its own kind of rate. So the first step is what investment has already been done that aligns with it, and then in future years, I'm sure we'll move some more money to align along those lines. But in Secretary Work's speeches, he's picked out these ideas of how can we better use the computational tools and humans to make humans more effective. He believes that American fighting men and women are uniquely suited to do that because of the autonomy that we give them in fighting and the ability, the way we rely on their experience and their skill to make decisions in real time. He wants to help them do that better by providing them with better information and with decision support tools and with the benefits that machines can provide to help them do better. My personal view aligned with that is that it has to be tied with how can we build things faster. Because if you're going to build the third offset in a 20-year development cycle, you need to be thinking about the fifth offset already because of Moore's Law, because of the way the world changes. So from the Air Force side, we're certainly behind the ideas. We're interested in moving forward with them, but we also got to think about how do we field those things quickly. How do we go to open architecture systems so we can update them rapidly without going through another great big long development process? And we're thinking about all this. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to ask you about the issue of the Russian rocket engines. To ask you about the issue of the Russian rocket engines in the context of this move to a longer-term view. There are people on the Hill who would like very much for you to move off of engines sooner and to spend the additional extra money to just, go with Delta vehicles and just be done with the Russian problem. Can you just walk us through, from your strategic point of view, how you view that and what kind of trades that would entail and how close you are to knowing exactly what the cost would be?
So from my strategic point of view, what I'm interested in is assured access to space first. The United States needs to make sure that we can put payloads up when we need to and have the ability to reach the 8 or so orbits that we care about, that we need to be able to reach. And because of the resource limits, then I also want to have competition. I want to have more than one source that gives me that assured access to space because I want to have industry competing with each other to drive that cost down, to provide innovative solutions at the lowest cost for the taxpayer. So from a strategy perspective, that's what I care about. To get to the details of the nuts and bolts of how we'll get there, we'll work that out with the Congress on what it is they want us to do. We have guidance in the past that said we're supposed to buy launch services, and that was designed, I believe, to help build our commercial space industry and capability by requiring us to go out and purchase launch services, not engines or first stages or second stages or third stages, but a launch service that gets us to the orbit we need to. And we have moved down the line toward a competitive environment that will allow us to do that by purchasing launch services. If Congress
wants us to do in a different approach, where there are ways to do it. We're working with them on what they want us to do and make sure that everybody is informed about the costs on each step of the way. We'll work that out between now and the NDAA and the Congress on exactly what they're doing.
But on that Delta, that is still, essentially it's a subscription, but you still have two providers.
But not at all the ordinances you want to get to, and not at a cost competitive point. So Delta can do about anything, but it's cost prohibitive to do the low end work. And so you'd have one provider that focuses on the low end work and one provider that focuses on the high end work. And so you wouldn't really have a whole lot of competition because it's going to be much cheaper to use the low end system to do low end work. Delta can't compete for that work. And then you don't have anybody else competing for the high end work. And so we're trying to, again, have competition to get assured access to space in the 8 orbits that we think we need to do.
You don't actually, right now, there's two providers on the high end. There's only Delta at this time.
That's right, but that's only a fraction of the orbits that I want to get to, so I'd like to have competition on as many of those orbits as I can. Yes, Jordan, go ahead, and I'll go back to you.
All right, sir, go ahead. Sir, my question is about the total force issue.
Okay.
And, out of the report on the structure of the Air Force, about 40 or so recommendations, how's that going? And do you see any speaking points now and so forth?
So first I'd say, I think that the United States Air Force kind of sets the standard for how you do total force integration. If you look at our force, roughly half of the combat forces and the combat support forces that we present are in the Guard and Reserve. We know how to do that. We've done it for 25 years or more as a wing commander at Bagram. On any given day, my force was somewhere between 15% to 25% reserve component. Guys fall in and do a great job, and we work forward. And we'll continue to set that standard. We want to keep doing it better. We want to keep doing it in the most cost-efficient way we can. So we're getting ready to deliver our second report to the commission on the force structure of the Air Force. We've closed a few items. We hope to close more this year as we work forward. Some of them are hard that are left to do, or we've already done them, and some of them have either a policy or legislative constraint that we have to address before we can move forward. We have a champion assigned to each one of those issues. We'll work them hard this year. We completed a review of 100% of our mission areas and looked at the mix between the Guard, the Reserve, and the active component. Overall, we conclude that we're stressed in most of those mission areas across the force. And as we made some movements every year in planning choices, we bring another few recommendations forward. What we find is that the movements that are left to make are fairly small to optimize the mix so that for the rotational requirement, you have enough active guys you can deploy more often. Reserve and Guard can't deploy as often as citizen airmen. So you have enough to be able to cover that requirement and enough to cover the surge requirement of whatever the worst case scenario is that we're told to plan against by the department. So we've done a look through 100% of those mission areas. We've moved some resources back and forth between. This year we'll work on the kind of non-mission area things, the policy and legislative things that we need to get done. And we'll go back to some of those mission areas that were really hard, or that had a lot of change in them because of, the RPA or a fighter force that was getting smaller. And now that we kind of set a line about fighter squadrons, now we'll go back and we'll look at some of those things again in the year. Yes, ma'am. You're gonna have to speak up.
Okay. My name is Laura Solomon with Defense News. I was looking at the investment in science and technology in the budget document. It looks like there's a little bit more than last year, which is good because I know sequestration forced Air Force to cut a lot of S&T. So I'm wondering if you can tell me, do you think we're investing enough in S&T right now? And also, how do you protect that investment in the coming decades with the bow wave of modernization programs?
So in a budget constrained environment, there are probably a lot of areas that we'd like to invest more. S&T is one of those. We're a technological force. We're going to continue to need to develop new ways to do things. We get guidance from the department on kind of a minimum investment level. As our hip pocket, as we build the program, we use about 1.9%
99% of our total obligation authority is kind of a marker that we use so that we don't cut it to pay bills. We don't want to go below that. And then as we work through building our program and through the program budget review process with the DoD, other ideas get added in, so it raises a little bit in that PBR process as ideas are added from other places that are given to us to go execute. So we'll, in the future, we'll stick somewhere close to that 2% of our total authority in science and technology unless our budget environment drastically changes.
Do you think that's enough investment?
Well, like I said, there are a whole lot of places that I'd like to be able to put. I think it's the right investment for where I am at the budget level that I'm at with the requirements that I face in the for now. Yes, sir.
Sir, Don Rexon, Gotham News Service. Just a question. First of all, thank you for coming to brief us. Congratulations on being able to implement the planning process. In the recent budget, it appears that the Air Force and really across DoD is fully funding the nuclear recapitalization. And subsequently, I guess based on the Friday meeting that you had, James Drew talked about some of your comments of sort of the nuclear aspect and GBSD amongst them, certainly becoming unmanageable starting in FY22. How are we going to handle sort of bomber, tanker, fighter, and then we have to add trainer, missile, and the list keeps growing in the 20s, and how are we going to be able as a nation?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. And, the first thing I'd say is that yes, the Air Force is fully resourcing the recapitalization of the nuclear enterprise. We're responsible for what I call 3 of the 4 legs of the nuclear triad. The traditional 3 legs are the sea-based leg, the ground-based leg, and the air-based leg, and then the 4th leg is the nuclear command and control system that supports, allows the president to stay in communication with his responsibilities or her responsibilities. We're fully resourcing that plan as it's out there. When we look ahead and built that detailed 20-year plan, what we found is in our second 5 years of that 20-year plan is where we have the biggest problem in being able to move forward and modernize the Air Force. There are a variety of reasons. The kind of shorthand is that's the place where the result of 20 years of only buying 20 airplanes a year. For the last 20 years or so, the Air Force has acquired about 20 aircraft a year. 20 years prior to that, we acquired about 200 aircraft a year. And so you can imagine the impact that has on the average age of the fleet. So that comes together primarily in the fighter force. In that second fight up, the F-15 becomes unsupportable unless you put a whole lot of money into it. F-16s that we had planned to retire and had taken the money from, we actually have some more service life on them, but we'll have to go put the money into O&M and being able to fly them. And we'll use that to address the gap. But we have a gap of several hundred fighter aircraft if we're going to maintain the 1900 TAI that Congress asked us to maintain or directed us to maintain, which is pretty close to the numbers that we've looked at in studies. Because of the truncated purchase of the F-22 and because the F-35 has been able to accelerate in to fill that gap as the department hoped when they made that decision, that gap, we can't buy our way out of it with new airplanes at the budget levels that we see. So we're going to have to extend older airplanes to fill that gap. So those bills come together at the same time as the GBSD or the replacement for the Minuteman III come. And so those add up together to mean that we're going to have to make choices on what we buy in that year. We won't make those choices. We'll participate in the dialogue. We know it was a national decision on what we're going to recapitalize, in accordance with that decision. But if you look at that math and you get to that period, then we'll either have to find more money for the nuclear enterprise, or we'll have to make trades within our TOA at that time. And if you make those trades, you're balancing readiness, capacity, and capability or modernization, and we'll do our best to manage within that. But the answer is almost got to be we'll have to get smaller during that time frame if the total authority doesn't go up to help us get through that 5-year period. And the Navy, has made a similar argument with the Ohio replacement program. They get to their problem about a year earlier than we do. They get to theirs at the end of this bill budget that we've delivered in 21. We start to get there in about 22, and I think both services would like to have a discussion about how we're going to pay those bills. And what just the country wants to do. So thanks for the question. Yes, sir.
Sure. George Nicholson with the Global Special Operations Foundation. Last Thursday at the Atlantic Council, General Miller, Marine Commandant, said one of his highest concerns, priorities, is our over-dependence on GPS. General Mattis, the former CENTCOM commander, had made a comment a couple of years ago, I've got Marines out there that can't read maps anymore. He said, I'm gonna use GPS. Then on last Friday at AEI, Admiral Richardson, Chief of Naval Operations, said exactly the same thing. We need to look at future solutions. Since you own what they're looking at, the GPS, what kind of steps and initiatives is the Air Force doing now to solve that problem?
So, we're continuing to improve and modernize the GPS constellation that the world depends on. It's not something we can move away from because the world depends on it for a whole lot of purposes, and they expect the Air Force to do it. So we'll continue to fly the GPS constellation, we'll continue to improve it, and then we'll continue to improve its ability to support the warfighter as we work through it, which means improving its ability to work in contested environments against people that are jamming. It's certainly prudent, though, to think about alternative means, and the department is pursuing several alternative means. Most of those are being executed not in my budget, but in other services' budget. But there are things that we'll all, have access to as we go forward. But the last airplane I flew was the Strike Eagle, and you're supposed to, keep that INS updated all the time and let that be primary, and keep your map up handy. But put that away because GPS is so good. So you're right on identifying the problem. The Naval Academy, I know, is teaching astro navigation again to midshipmen. The Army and the Marine Corps are interested in map reading, and so are we. We continue to do that. But the issue is not so much can we read a map and get to where we want to get. It's can we deliver weapons with the precision that we've become accustomed to in a GPS-denied environment. And we're working that problem. Yes, sir.
General John Turpak, Air Force Magazine. For the past couple of years, the chief has been saying, we're just not going to start any new programs if we can't afford them. But you just said, the ground-based strategic deterrent, the other parts of the triad, it's in heavy conflict with the conventional force. So, you told us last week we need to have a national discussion on just how much of that we need. How do you stimulate that national discussion, and are you still trying to squeeze 20 pounds of programs and things like that?
Well, I've had some coaching on that since I talked to you. Some of the coaching I've had is a reminder that new administrations typically undertake a nuclear review. It's one of the first things that new administrations do. And I don't really need to worry about that debate. It's going to happen, and I look forward to that debate, and we want to participate in it. I think that debate will happen. I think we'll discuss it, and I think new administration is a good time, for people to work through it. Which doesn't mean the current administration won't decide to take a look at it between now and then, and we'd be happy to support that. Bottom line is that the nuclear deterrent, is the number one thing that I'd like. Safe, reliable nuclear deterrent is the number one thing I'd like to leave for my grandchildren when I leave the Air Force. But as we talked about Friday, I think 21st century deterrence is more than that nuclear deterrent. Certainly still the nuclear deterrent. We're certainly still committed to the triad as the best way to do that. But we know that there are cyber threats against our country. We know that our potential adversaries are developing ways to try to operate without triggering a nuclear threshold, and to try to deter us below a nuclear threshold from becoming involved in places. And so what we're asking for is that broader debate. What's 21st century deterrence? What are the pieces that play into that, so that we can go forward and do our share of helping provide that for the nation, knowing that certainly there will remain a nuclear component to that. To the larger question of how we fit stuff in, that's what we do in that 20-year plan. So it means that we work closely with our requirements folks, as General Lowe pointed out, and we need to make trade-offs in those requirements to be able to say, can we afford this requirement or not? And so, for instance, on the TX, we did some work, the best work that we've done in a while, to kind of go through each requirement and look at what we think it should cost. When we take it out to industry in an RFP that we release this fall on TX, we want to have a good feel already for what do we think those should cost.
We've got curves, you know, that show us where the knee is on those requirements. And we worked hard to not just have a set of requirements built in isolation, but to take in the budget environment that we're in and decide which requirements are we willing to pay for as we go forward. So we've got to continue to do that work to make things fit. We're gonna have to set priorities, and we're gonna, I think, you know, when I was a young guy, they taught me, okay, you know, you build airplanes by the pound, they said. You know, you pay for them by the pound. The more it weighs, the more you'll pay for it, so you gotta try to reduce the weight, you know, on the airplane. Since then, we've gotten into maybe where you buy them, you pay for them by the year of development, paying the engineering force, paying everybody who's working on it for all that time is a tremendous part of the cost. It has to be amortized across it. And then, since then, I've also learned you kind of pay for them by the line of code, because that's where the touch labor is now. The touch labor is in the software now more than it is in the manufacturing process. And we have to work with our partners in industry to try to find ways to reduce really the cost of all three of those things, and to be able to build them faster along the way. Because if I'm gonna build cheaper, it's gotta be done faster, or I'll be paying for it by the year. I've gotta have requirements that are achievable in a shorter amount of time. And we're gonna have to work together to make sure that we continue to get better. You already got one, didn't you? Sir.
Chuck Heffelbauer, going back to a low comment on the long range quick armor requirement to probably defend it forever. What is this arsenal aircraft? Where do they come from? What is it?
So, you know, it's not.
Is it anywhere on that chart?
It's not a brand new idea. You know, we've talked in the past, and certainly different thought leaders have talked in the past about, hey, if you're going to use a bunch of standoff weapons, the problem is the payload that you have on the systems that we have. And so, you know, I remember seeing articles and ideas about using C-17s or using different ways that you could do that. The idea here is a concept born in this iteration in the SCO office in OSD that says it would be prudent, and we agree to look at, to take existing air platforms that we have, match them with weapons we already have or weapons that are in development, and see if there's a cost point there where you could take higher payload, longer range, more on station time, and be able to take advantage of that in a standoff platform. You know, we think we're gonna need a mix of standoff and penetrating capability. Part of what we'll be working through in this 10-year plan is trying to define what that mix is as we move forward. And so it's an idea that certainly is worth looking into. We'll participate in that with the department, and it should get fleshed out some more.
Well, I think we're at the end of our time here, so thanks very much for your hour you spent with us and a little bit of time this afternoon. As a engine room alumni, I very much appreciate where you're going to. I would be interested, not today, but another time, is figuring out how this collides with the JROC and the joint and OSD and all the rest of that stuff. Because it's one thing for the service to march out, by another to get the rest of the department to march out the same way. So that'd be interesting. But anyway, I'd like to provide you this book. It is under the gift limit. You're Power Reborn. So in your spare time, if you get a chance to do some reading, we do that. Please help me thank Colonel Holmes for his time.